Welcome to the next module of the Big Four, the four pillars of great copywriting. This time we're talking about the three primal drivers that are in every single person at all times, and they impact their decisions and how you can apply those in your advertising to get people to pay attention, to get people to want to hear your messages and feel understood. The three primal drivers are fear, desire, and core needs. We're going to discuss all three of those right now. Now, the definition of fear is just an anxious feeling that is caused by over anticipation of some imagined event or experience. This is important to note because when we discuss the fears in this next part of the module, each of the fears are things that your prospect or your avatar is going to be experiencing as a form of anxiety or over anticipation of the future, meaning either they haven't happened yet or they are anticipating some future action based off of some past trauma or past result. So the fear isn't in the moment. You're not scaring them in the moment with this fear. Instead, you're understanding what is driving them from a primal standpoint and a fear standpoint. There are actually 5 primal fears, and they go up in sequence, as in they start with the lowest and most base primal fear, which is extinction, and they move upwards in terms of fear all the way up to ego death. From extinction and mutilation to loss of autonomy, separation, and finally ego death. We're going to discuss each one of those. The first one is extinction. This is the basic level. We're talking about actual annihilation or ceasing to exist. This is death. This is more than death. This is not existing anymore or never existing. An existential threat to their lives or to their mental existence. This is something where most of the time, this is a visceral, lizard brain style response. We're talking about, reacting and flinching. And, if there is a car hurtling towards you at breakneck speed, that is the fear that is elicited with extinction. If you have a service or a product that deals with either mitigating some of these fears or that helps them handle if one of these fears were to occur, it's important to understand that. For example, life insurance comes to mind immediately. If you sell life insurance, then what you're essentially selling is protection from this fear of extinction and what is going to happen if you end up passed away. Health insurance instead of life insurance would be the fear that this is going to put something, on you or your family, or the fear of not being able to survive something that would kill you, that sort of thing. So these apply in different ways. It's not just the insurance space, but extinction is the most basic level. It's usually a visceral, reactive response. The second one is mutilation. Now, this is true physical damage in most cases. It can mean a metaphorical loss of a piece of yourselves, maybe a very important piece of your identity or a very important piece of your family, something like that. But for the most part, this is physical. You're afraid of losing a part of your body or losing the integrity or function of your organs, loss of natural function in general. This is where you start getting into fears like getting old, aging, having some sort of disease that debilitates you or makes you lose part of your body. I mean, diabetics can be afraid of losing limbs due to diabetes, due to rot. There are certain diseases that break down the integrity of your organs. There's certain chemicals in food or in additives in your environment that could reduce your natural function. Sufferers from migraines, sufferers from, that sort of thing. So a lot of physical symptoms are manifested in products or services that are trying to quell those physical symptoms. But also a metaphorical loss of a piece of yourselves can be that identity thing where you're protecting against some sort of identity loss. And so whether that's protecting against a loss of your job, protecting against a loss of face with your family, something like that would fall into this mutilation standpoint, because the fear that someone experiences due to this primal fear is going to color all of their decisions when making a decision about a product that involves that fear or mitigates that fear. The third one, moving up the chain, is loss of autonomy. Now, this can also manifest physically, where someone is actually immobilized, they are actually paralyzed, but usually this is where we're starting to get psychological. People feel restricted, people feel enveloped or overwhelmed. This is where they feel trapped in a job. This is where they feel trapped in traffic. This is where they feel trapped in their hometown because they can't get out. This is where they feel like they're trapped with a certain type of ailment, like a chronic disease, or something will always feel that way and they're never going to escape it. Those types of things are contributing to the fear of loss of autonomy because they're restricting people, they're enveloping them, they're making them feel overwhelmed and anxious, sometimes physically immobilized or paralyzed by whatever ailment has them. This is different from mutilation because they're not losing something or they're not breaking down the integrity, but this is the fear of that restriction and overwhelmness and just never getting out of that type of chronic situation. That's why it's a little higher than mutilation, but still very, very primal when it comes to that fear. And you can see if your product or service fits in this way by seeing if you are alleviating or somehow helping them fix this fear of being overwhelmed or anxious or controlled or restricted in some way. The next one is separation. Separation is almost always psychological, but also so it's related to themselves or their family or something around them, maybe their job. That you're dealing with abandonment, you're dealing with rejection, you're dealing with the loss of connection of people who mean something to them. Also, respect, not being respected, being considered not a non-person, not being accepted or included into places they want to be accepted. These types of things are where the person is either socially afraid of being separated or rejected. If you sell dating advice for powerful men or women, they might be afraid of rejection or being not respected in their way. If you sell some sort of clothing that gets people to have this level of status, then you would be dealing with the fear of not having that status. There's lots of different products that appeal to the alleviation of a fear of separation. But remember, all of these primal drivers that we're going to be talking about are operating beneath the level of consciousness that a person is going through. These are things driving them, but they are not actively aware of the specifics. So if someone is afraid of abandonment, then one of the ways your ad can touch them is by saying that they will have a community of people. If someone's afraid of rejection, then you can have a guarantee that means they'll never get rejected or something. There's different ways to mitigate these fears that we can discuss in very specific terms for your advertising. But the ideal here is that you're understanding the primal driver, because finally we move up to ego death. Now, this is the highest level primal fear, but it's still subconscious. This is when people are afraid of being humiliated or shamed, personal self-disapproval. So if they have values or identities that you've figured out and they are going against those, then the guilt or disapproval that comes from doing that on their own, but also hidden truths. So these are things that people are hiding from themselves, from others, mostly from themselves, because they don't want them to get out. They're afraid that it's going to conflict or destroy the identity that they've created or the life that they've created. And obviously, looking at each one of these, you could see the applicability for coaching services, for high-level services. And even if you're not dealing with something that is a primal fear in your marketplace, like if you're dealing with accounting or you're dealing with real estate, there are certain drivers that are moving people in certain directions from the fear standpoint that may be relevant in your advertising depending on what type of those services you have. For example, accountants can be helping business owners who have an expense problem or an accounting problem that is contributing to a lack of cash flow, which would contribute to their ego death of having to shut down their company. So those types of things matter. The drivers matter. Now we're looking at the 7 primal desires. These are categorized to list out the same way as the 7 deadly sins. This is not, however, a religious thing. This is not a moral indictment. Instead, these are just labels that you can apply to the different types of desires that people have underneath their conscious awareness. Each one of these has a different motivator behind it, and we're going to discuss each one. The first one is pride. Now, if someone has a primal desire of pride, they're usually seeking some sort of status, some sort of superiority for themselves, some sort of achievement. You notice a lot of pride in going to certain schools, or in acquiring certain type of prestigious items, or in acquiring certain job titles, or achieving a certain level of success in business in terms of revenue or clientele. Pride drives all of those things, which is something that every human thinks about in terms of their social status, but is especially motivating to people who are achievement oriented or in topics that are highly achievement oriented. The next one is envy. Now, envy can look similar to pride on the surface, but in reality, envy is centered more on comparison and self-doubt. So if pride is something where the person is striving for achievement, envy is something where they are striving to not be seen as a certain way, or to be seen as better than other things, either other people or other situations or their past self, whatever it happens to be. It's usually driven by comparison. Their decision-making process is driven by comparison, and it's also seeded with a little bit of self-doubt because they don't have the backing personally in this way that will allow them to either be happy with their current level, and therefore it's driving them to higher achievement, or happy with their status among others. That's why self-doubt is one of those things that drive envy that you can then apply in your advertising if you understand that those are the deeper motivations of your marketplace. The next one is called lust. Lust is usually pretty straightforward. If you are in a marketplace that sells sexual stuff, whether it's sex toys or sex education or relationship education, things like that, lust is a huge driver for all of those, obviously, but also just affection in general. There are marketplaces that drive people to want to feel appreciated, want to feel part of a loving and caring community, and that lumps into lust because that primal driver for sex and affection and connection is very, very powerful, because if someone is not receiving it, then they feel that lack in themselves. But if they are not, if they're not fulfilled in whatever they currently have, it's going to be motivating other decisions as well. So it's important to understand if your industry is centered around this interpersonal connection, or if it's sex related, or if it's affection related and community related. Like, the next one is gluttony. Now, gluttony is not based on food. It's not just for restaurateurs or for consumer packaged goods. It's actually for anything that could be considered impulsive or compulsive in a way. So if an impulse is to grab a candy bar at the checkout counter, an impulse could also be to go on a trip because they're feeling controlled, or go on a trip because they saw an ad. Maybe they're compulsively driven to do something or buy a product or get a service because they need something else. It's generally a primal driver that is not from a place of achievement or going out to seek a specific outcome, but more from a place of they're being compelled to do it. They're compulsively reaching out and doing the thing. And most of you will know if you're in a compulsion oriented marketplace, because there's usually not a really good reason for someone to come out and buy or engage with your services. And the people that you interact with tend to be of that compulsive, impulsive manner. It's just important to understand, because when you appeal to those, or when you write about that in your advertisement, you're going to be speaking better to those people for those services. The next one is sloth. Now, sloth is not laziness. It's actually usually related to fatigue or a lack of energy or a seeking of ease. Usually people who are very busy, or they have a desire to do something, but then have a lack of energy, or are just so tired that they aren't getting that thing for some reason, or aren't doing that thing, will be driven by the primal driver of sloth. Because if you can show them in your advertising that they can achieve the thing they want to achieve without having to expend a certain amount of effort that is above a threshold for them, then they're far more likely to go with your solution. And this is usually good for most business owners, unless you require a certain amount of engagement with your product or your service, but also important to understand for those of you who are contributing to saving time and saving money and, getting more things for less. This is where you're going to be living in sloth, because you're contributing to that increase in the ease of their life, or you're helping them with a lack of energy to get a certain outcome. Lots of systems and strategies fall into the sloth area because you're making it easier for someone to get the result that they want. The next one is wrath. Now, wrath is centered around rage, which is fairly obvious, but also the sense of justice and revenge. If a person is driven primally to achieve a sense of parity or justice off of a wrong or something they feel is incorrect or unfair, that's going to be motivating their decision very strongly. A lot of lawyers can definitely see wrath as one of the primal drivers of some of their clients. Revenge being another one. Certain types of services could be helping someone get revenge on a prior client or a partner or something, not in the physical harm sense, but in the I'm doing this because I'm motivated to show you kind of sense. And this is a huge motivator for a lot of people when it comes to politics, when it comes to certain levels of achievement in their career, obviously legal situations, and many, many different marketplaces where a sense of justice and parity and fairness, but also a sense of achieving due to a past trauma or past result, or just simply rage to get something done in general, would be around wrath. And then there's greed. Now, greed is fairly simple in that it is a primal driver for more. This is different from pride in that it's not necessarily achievement oriented. It's more about the act of striving, the act of getting more stuff, but also not like gluttony where it's impulsive. It's truly a drive to do more, to be more, to get more. It's also something seated in gambling or certain types of addictions because it's very difficult for a person motivated by greed at their primal desire to know when enough is enough and to know when, they've achieved enough. So that driver of constantly getting more and more and more can be very relevant for individuals who are selling luxury real estate or selling, growth financially or selling, certain types of achievement physically or athletically, travel, certain types of trips, certain types of images, things like that. Greed can be a very, very powerful motivator in the sense that people just want more. And it's not just about money. It can be obviously very strongly about money, but in general, just that sense of wanting more and more and more and compulsively having to go get it. The third primal driver are something that I call core needs. Now, there's two different ways to look at core needs and they kind of build off of each other. So let's dive into both of them real quick. The first one is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You may have seen this if you've taken psychology classes, but it's a very simple pyramid of where our human needs come from and our human drives come from, starting at a physiological level, as in, breathing and eating, and then going all the way up to being a self-actualized human who is completely fulfilled with oneself. You can call it enlightenment if you want, but most people achieve a sense of fulfillment and contentment from their normal lives if they've achieved what they want to achieve. So let's start at the bottom, the basic levels of physiological needs and safety needs. So physiological needs are fairly clear. If you sell a commodity that gives someone shelter, if food, water, certain types of air quality, things like that, things that are physiologically required to live, a person will always strive to meet their physiological needs before anything else, because if they can't, if they're starving, then they have to eat. If they're dehydrated, they have to drink. It's fairly easy to understand the physiological level, but if you are a person who sells products or services that cater to physiological needs, then understand that maybe your best customers will be people who are in physiological needs at the time. One of the very famous copywriters had a quote that said he could sell anything as long as you gave him a starving crowd. And I won't give you the whole anecdote, but the whole point being that the most important thing is to understand what your marketplace desperately needs. Physiological is where that starts. Now, for most people, especially in Western countries, their physiological needs are met. And what comes next is safety, not only safety of their shelter and their location, being physically safe, but also safety mentally and emotionally. Because if they are mentally secure in their income, if they are, emotionally secure in their family, then they know that they have a sense of stability and safety that they can rely on, and they'll move up to the next one, which is that love and belongingness. When someone feels secure and safe, they can start to establish deeper relationships with themselves, but also with others. And they're probably going to start with others. Most people start with relationships because they want to fulfill whatever type of needs that they have from a connection standpoint. Once they meet those needs, they'll move on to esteem, which is personal. And you notice this a lot, especially if you're a service provider in relationships or in dating or anything like that. You'll notice that individuals tend to go into relationships before working on themselves and their own needs. And that's because it's easier and also more natural to think that the solution to an internal problem will be related in someone else rather than their own seeking. And this is shown by patterns over and over and over again, and you can kind of rely on it so that when someone does feel secure and feels like loved and like they belong, then they'll start to work on themselves from an esteem standpoint. And once they truly find themselves and feel self-confident, they'll move up to the final part, which is that self-actualization. And for some people, that can be giving back. It can be philanthropy. It can be working and volunteering. It can be building something of significance. But the top level is that self-actualization, where they go out from themselves and their immediate family and start going out and benefiting others. This is relevant because it applies to the 6 human drives. Now, the 6 human drives were originally discovered by Tony Robbins, or popularized by Tony Robbins, not discovered. And the thing that is most interesting about these is that a human will always have the first 4 human drives fulfilled. They will always be filled by something. So their personality or their ego is going to find a way to fill certainty, variety, significance, and love and connection. Those will be filled by whatever happens to be filling those needs. The issue being sometimes the way they fill them is constructive and other times it is destructive. So for example, and this is obviously a very, very extreme example, but a person's certainty can come from doing heroin and getting the high from injecting heroin. Obviously, that is a destructive way of dealing with certainty and fulfilling certainty. And they get their variety from injecting the drug and feeling the high in terms of, having a different trip every time. The point being, a person can destructively fill these human drives. The point for writers, for ad writers, is that your prospects are currently filling these in some way, shape, or form. And what becomes an issue if you're writing an ad is if your product or your service or even the way that you write your ad seems to be coming into conflict with one of these drives. For example, and this is a weight loss example, if your prospect is someone who can lose 50 pounds or needs to lose 50 pounds, their current certainty is probably coming from the types of foods that they enjoy and love. They know what they like. They know what their lifestyle currently is. They're achieving a certain level of certainty from their lifestyle. Their variety might come from buying different food at different restaurants every day and eating out so that they know that, they can try different things and get cool variety from that. Maybe their significance comes from something unrelated to fitness or unrelated to their physical appearance. And maybe the love and connection that they have doesn't care about their physical appearance or their overweightness. So now you're dealing with a person who can benefit from a weight loss product, but has their core needs met in a way that is not conducive to wanting to buy a product. So for you, as the person selling weight loss, you have to understand that in your advertisement, the person you're speaking to may be at a point in their life where they need to have their core needs replaced in a loving and clear way in order to achieve the result that they want. But by your simple awareness that that's a fact, you can write an ad that achieves that for them. For example, in this weight loss example we've been using, if the person is achieving certainty from eating out at restaurants and they know that they can go get food at any time and their variety is coming from choosing different foods there, then one of the ads you could write for that person is, I will help you lose 50 pounds in the next 60 days, and you don't have to stop eating out at your favorite restaurants. All you have to do are these 3 simple tricks. That advertisement immediately appeals to a person who wants to lose 50 pounds, but currently has their core needs filled with other things that are not conducive. Meaning you're not threatening them as the ad writer, but you're appealing to them because they want to get this certain result. And then eventually, when they go to your product, they might find out that they can go to those restaurants, but they have to order a very large salad and eat that first, and then order the thing that they want if they're still hungry. They don't need to know that when you're writing the ad, but you can fulfill those promises if you know what you're doing on your ad writing. Now, the last 2 core human needs are the ones that usually appear after a person's first 4 core needs, their personality or the ego, is fulfilled in a constructive way. Meaning, if certainty, variety, significance, and love and connection are all filled in constructive, empowering ways, then a person can focus on growth and contribution. And this is relevant because of the Maslow hierarchy we just saw, where if a person's basic needs are met and their connection needs are met, then they can move on to actualization. And this is relevant for anyone who sells more spiritual, more searching, more actualization-oriented stuff, because your ideal prospect is probably going to be someone who's already set financially or physically or emotionally, and they simply want to grow. So think about that in those contexts. Those are the 3 primal drivers. Here, we're going to put the 3 primals together. The first way is to find and confirm them, and the second way is to incorporate them into your writing. This is how you find and confirm the 3 primal drivers. The first way, just like when we did the target market research, and my ideal way, is interviews. If you can get an interview with your ideal prospect or your avatar, you're going to very quickly see, just based on their mannerisms, based on how they interact with the questions, what their primal desires and fears could be. This is going to give you a very educated guess on what is motivating them and why they're taking action or why they did take action previously. For example, if you get an interview with someone who just bought a product from you or just engaged you in their services, you can interview them and ask them questions like, what made you buy? What were you thinking right before you bought? Things like that, where you can dive deep into their psychology around the buying process in a moment that is hyper relevant for you. The other way to do that, besides interviews, is to candidly observe people. Now, this is where, if you are an auto dealer or if you're an auto salesman, you just observe the people who are currently interacting with other salespeople. You see what other salespeople might be saying and how the potential prospect is interacting with them. You might see who walks around the lot. If you're a real estate agent, you can see how the other realtors work at their open houses, and you can see how they interact with potential buyers. This type of observation allows you to step outside the situation and look inward and see, okay, this person is standing away. This person is talking to them with their arms folded. This person doesn't look happy. This person looks really happy. Those types of observations give you insights into what is currently going on with the marketplace. The third way to do this is introspective knowledge. Now, this is only applicable if you yourself are or used to be a member of your target market. So if you're a realtor and you've bought a home, then you know what it's like to purchase a home. You know what it's like to go through the process as a home buyer or a home seller. You know what it might be like to do it yourself. This is where you kind of sit down with a notebook and really think back to that experience. And the closer you can get to that experience, the better. This is only relevant if it's you, though, or if you are very, very close to your ideal target market. The next thing is NLP, specifically criteria elicitation. Now, this is not the neuro-linguistic programming that magicians and hypnotists are using on people. Instead, this is just a way to interview. This is a way to ask questions. More specifically, this is where you will ask questions of the person you're interviewing, or maybe a guest, or maybe a person at a bar that you meet who fits your target market avatar. And you're asking them questions like, Why does that matter to you? If you ask them, if they're buying a home soon and they say, yes, I am buying a home, I'm just looking right now. And you're like, okay, well, why are you just looking right now? Then they would say, oh, well, I want to grow my family. We might be having a kid soon, so I love to see how big the home, what I can afford and what type of homes we can have with an extra bedroom. You go, oh, okay, great. So why is having a bigger home and an extra bedroom important to you? Oh, well, because I know that if we have the child, then that child needs a separate room so that my wife and I can have our own room and not have to split up that way. And you go, oh, okay, great. So having a child's separate room is very, very important to you so that your wife can be separate. Why is that important to you? And you're like, well, because my parents had a very small house and it was it put a strain on their relationship because they didn't have a room to themselves and they didn't have a room for the baby to be in. So those types of why questions, those types of deeper communication is very important to figure out all of these primal drivers and fears and core needs and desires, because people will give you a lot of really good information. Now, obviously, this implies that you have some trust with that person, but you'd be surprised how many people will be willing to engage in an authentic dialogue with you if you're not trying to sell them anything. As long as you're just having a communication, having a conversation, having something, just between the two of you, this type of criteria elicitation can come relatively easily. The last way to find and confirm these primals is to actually dig into the data around behavioral psychology, specifically cognitive biases and cognitive distortions. There's a very large list of cognitive biases that a person could be afflicted by at any given time, and it applies to every single human being on the planet. Nobody can get away with not having any cognitive biases. So, by researching the cognitive biases that may be around your decision making process, you can better understand the types of primal fears and drivers that are going through a person's mind. Now, this isn't ideal because you're still guessing at this point, but it's better than nothing because you'll understand what is affecting people's decision making process. The other side of the coin is cognitive distortions. Cognitive distortions are specifically related to fears, usually, and they're terms used by psychologists and psychiatrists to either diagnose or to help people through certain bad situations in their lives. But what you can do as a marketer is understand that the person that is experiencing these cognitive distortions is usually experiencing them due to some sort of deep-rooted fear or some sort of deep-rooted primal desire that they are going towards. By understanding those things and really connecting them within your target market, you're going to be able to find and confirm to the best of your ability before you write an ad what these things are. You're going to be miles and miles ahead of your competition by doing this kind of exercise. Most people just write something and throw it up and see if it works, but you are going to understand why you're writing it and the different, deeper reasons why your people should be reacting to it. And then based on the data that comes back, you can adjust. Finally, here's how to incorporate this into your writing. Now, it's great to understand primal drivers, and it's really cool to dive into the psychology of why people buy and what people are thinking, but how do we incorporate it into our writing? This next part is a headline. Is it needed? So when you're writing a headline for your ad, first off, what kind of ad is it? Is it a sales letter? Is it a direct mail? If you're writing an ad that requires a headline, a written headline to capture someone's attention, then you can immediately think, knowing what I know about their primal desire, knowing what I know about their primal fear, do I put something in this headline to capture their attention and show them that I know what they're going through? For example, if you are selling life insurance and you know that part of the primal fear that is driving a person to buy life insurance is their fear of death, but also the fear of what their death is going to do to their family if they die. And you also know that something that might be motivating them is a recent brush with death or a recent death in the family. By knowing those things, identifying your avatar and the when you're reaching them or something like that, your headline could very easily say, death in a family is never easy, but you don't want it to be hard for your family. That might be a powerful headline to grab someone. It might be too powerful, which is why I said, is it needed? By understanding a person's primal fears and desires, you can start to experiment with the things that pop out to that person. And then using some common sense and using a couple tests to your ideal market if you have to, find out where that balance of being authentic, but also being emotionally aware of where the person's at. And that'll let you know what type of headline or what type of attention grabbing thing you should use. The other way to incorporate it into your writing is by using power words. So if you understand that a person is afraid of death or is afraid of mutilation, or maybe they desire some sort of achievement, then you can go find words that appeal to that level of achievement or to those fears. If you're going towards achievement in some way, then you can use words like dominate. You can use words like conquer. Just big, powerful adjectives, using a thesaurus to really show that you are going to help someone achieve a certain result if their primal desire is to achieve or to, get their pride. The next way is to incorporate these things into stories. The best way to do this is if you already have live examples of past clients or current clients who have gone through an emotional journey with you in your product or service that you can then translate into some of the things that your ideal prospect is going to be experiencing. Those testimonials, those case studies are going to be hyper relevant, but the way you use them and the way that you target them is going to be based on your understanding of your ideal market's primals. So if let's say you are a realtor and you had a recent client who is a single parent with a single mom with 2 kids, and she just purchased her first home. You can tell the emotional journey of a single parent purchasing a home for her kids, and then appeal to those primal fears and desires and core needs that are reaching out to your ideal prospect if you want to help more single moms with kids or moms with kids or people who feel like they are in that situation. You can see the different connections probably. If you're applying this to your own business right now, you can see the different ways that your current prospects or past clients have gone through this emotional journey and where these primals were in those journeys. The last thing is their objections and rejections. So you can tie this to the stories. The people who worked with you, the people who didn't work with you, because by understanding what is driving someone primally, both on the fear side, the desire side, and the core need side, you can understand what their objections and rejections are going to be. If someone is afraid of dying, then their objections to your service for some reason are going to be related to that existential fear. If they are afraid of ego death or being humiliated, then they're going to bring up objections like, well, how do I know this is going to work for me? Or how do I know that I'm not going to look like a fool? Or how do I know that my wife isn't going to hate me for this? Just on and on. The objections are going to crop up because you've hit on a desire that they want, but they also have fears associated with the product. And by understanding the primals, you can anticipate the vast majority of the objections and rejections. And then obviously incorporate those into case studies. If you have a case study or testimonial that shows someone overcoming those things, then you can show it. And that's a phenomenal way to answer those things by digging into your primals.